I think you're going to enjoy connecting with Dr. Nongard. And as I mentioned, he has a business as a licensed psychotherapist and a history with clinical and management experience. And Ed, I know you also travel around giving seminars,
Yeah.
business seminars and business branding. And Dr. Nongard also does a lot of educating. In fact, he created an educational platform for continuing education units. It's very interesting. It was before, I don't know if you've heard of Udemy, but it was kind of an online university, and they're still in business. Anyway, Dr. Nongard's now in the room. So can you hear me?
Perfectly, which is why I fought the traffic to get home, since this is a pro broadcasting setup versus doing this on my laptop.
You look like you survived the trip, Richard.
Barely. I didn't realize how many red lights were in Las Vegas until I actually tried to get from Sahara and Torrey Pines to Rhodes Ranch.
Okay, well now you know, huh?
Right.
Okay, so we're going to dive right in. I've introduced Dr. Nongard, and let's just dive into this webinar, which has a focus on transformational leadership. This is part of a networking series that we're doing, and so I'd like you to imagine yourself, participants in this webinar, as you network in your next networking event and meet business leaders, rub shoulders with other business leaders, ask yourself, how might your experience be different if you do so seeing yourself as a transformational leader? So the identity of transformational leadership really goes across the board everywhere in our business. It affects our relationships with other professionals, and so I just want to ask Richard. I want to start out with the question: what is transformational leadership, and who needs to be a transformational leader?
Sure. Transformational leadership is two things. It is both a buzzword. You'll see it used a lot and not necessarily used correctly in all kinds of trainings and seminars and things that people are talking about. But in the world of academics, which I think we need to recognize that leadership, like psychology or like economics or like medicine, is an academic discipline. Many universities and schools have terminal degrees, doctoral degrees, master's degrees, bachelor's degrees, specifically in leadership. And so transformational leadership is a very specific type of leadership. And I think that there's really two definitions of it that I like. The first definition kind of focuses on how to be a transformational leader. And it really has a person look at their own giftedness first, so that they're operating from a base of their strengths in order to transform an organization. Now, Randy Dobbs, who's the former CEO of General Electric Capital, and also my partner in a lot of different projects, we're writing a new book together titled Leading Across the Generations. But he wrote a great book in 2010 titled Transformational Leadership, and he defines it as 5 skill sets. First, building a culture of excellence, improving the esprit de corps, communicating the issues and actions clearly, changing the financial results of an organization, whether it's a for-profit or a non-profit or even a family. Because if we don't have a change in the financial results, we haven't created something that is sustaining. But the 5th skill set is to leave behind a cadre of future transformational leaders. So a transformational leader doesn't become the most important person. What they do is instead transform those who are within an organization so that everybody can be the most important person. Because if a leader's tenure comes to an end, death, retirement, a change of life situation, if the ability to create a sustaining organization isn't there, then it really wasn't leadership anyway, which is often the case with a charismatic leadership or an authoritarian leader. And so transformational leadership really focuses on creating a continuity, if you will, the next generation of leaders.
Okay, so you talked about an esprit de corps and transformational leadership having something to do with engaging your community. What are the keys to engaging your community through this skill of transformational leadership?
Well, I think it involves really, in many cases, educating people. So I am the new chairman of the board for Best Buddies Nevada. Best Buddies is a worldwide organization in all 50 states and about 50 different countries. And it was started by Anthony Kennedy Shriver and Maria Shriver, 30 years ago. The state chapter here in Nevada, the board really has been functioning as a board in many different ways. The professionals, the CEO and the other employees are, obviously running the ship, but the board has the desire to serve. But because many of them are volunteers from the community, they literally don't know how to be a board. They don't know what a board does, and so. My job as the chairman, which is a new role for me, is going to be in large part teaching them how to engage their community, how to find stakeholders, and how to communicate with those folks. That's something that they want to do, and it's something they have the capacity to do, but it's not something that anybody's taught them to do. So I think that often engagement is about teaching skills, and in many cases, engaging is also about listening. So my first question for the board members is, what do you need from a chairman of the board? Or what do you need that person to do? And I want to listen because listening, communication is a two-way street. I think too many leaders are really good at, laying out the plan, but they're not so good at listening. And transformational leaders engage people by letting them know that their voices are heard.
Okay, so it sounds like very different from top-down leadership and from hierarchical models.
One of my favorite examples of a transformational leader in healthcare is the Studer Group. So I can't remember Mr. Studer's first name. So if he's listening to this later on, forgive me. But as the CEO of a medical center, in his first role as the CEO, he wanted the employees to know he was there to listen. And so he sent an email to all 5,000 employees, which can be a mistake, saying, what do you need from me? And one of those was actually from a nurse who said, hey, I work the swing shift and I get off work at 11:15 and I have to go all the way to the back of the parking garage to get my car, and there's no lights out there and I don't feel safe because there's a whole bunch of bushes, and and it would have been easy for him to dismiss one nurse's request that the bushes be trimmed in the back of the parking garage so she felt safer when she left at 11 o'clock at night. But he immediately attacked that first and put maintenance right on it to actually remove the bushes so that there was clear visibility. And that communicated to all of the staff that, hey, the new CEO actually listens to even the mundane things like bushes that need to be trimmed so that employees on second shift feel valued, so that they feel safe. That's the kind of thing transformational leaders do. I was lucky. I had a job when I was 17 at a Mexican restaurant. Some of you may be old enough to remember Chi-Chi's Mexican restaurants. And we had a general manager. His name was Chuck. I lost track of him, 35 years plus ago. But he had worked his way up from a dish man to a line cook, and then to a prep cook, then to a line cook, and then he got into management. And so he was the manager who would be out there bussing tables on a Friday night when the bus boys were behind. He was the guy who was filling up water at customers' tables, asking them if they were okay because the waiters were busy on a Friday or Saturday night. I'm real lucky he was one of my first bosses because I learned a lot from Chuck. And I'm always going to be grateful for the example of transformational leadership that he provided.
That's something that I think, everyone has some kind of image in their mind of some leader that it could be a teacher, it could be a boss, a leader that made a real impact in their lives, the kind of person that you remember, that you might want to stay in contact with. And it seems like you're describing that person. So,
I've had some leaders that weren't good examples, so I've learned from them also.
what?
I've had some leaders that weren't good examples,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and when I've left the organization, I got something very valuable from that as well, which was a list in my own mind of the things not to do with the employees, the board members, and the other people who I work with.
Well, how can a leader create a positive culture? And what are the results of that culture?
I think number one, a leader has to create a shared narrative with all of the stakeholders and all of the contributors. So what do I mean by a shared narrative? Stories are how we understand everything. It's how we communicate ideas. It's how we see where we fit into an organization. And there's a wonderful process researched a lot by Case Western Reserve University into a process called appreciative inquiry. Rather than in an organization looking at what's wrong, it actually looks at what's right. So let's say a company has 10% customer complaints, right? 10 out of 90 out of 100 customers are complaining.
Okay.
The traditional approach is to go figure out why those people are unhappy and what can be done to change it. But that's focusing on the problem. It's actually not focusing on the solution. So appreciative inquiry looks at the 90 people who are happy and asks why are they happy and how can we do more of it, with the belief that that will change the outcome in that 10%. This is a process that was used by British Air after 2001. This is a process that was used by John Deere. It's a process that's been used by nonprofits around the country. And what it really does is it asks every stakeholder to tell their story. This can be through interviews or it can be through town hall meetings. Everybody from the custodian to the board member to the CEO to the customers, and to share their story. I have a story. I have a relationship with Unified Financial Credit Union. I'll throw out their name because they're awesome. And I have a story about how I became involved with Unified Financial Credit Union and how they not only impacted me, but the organization of which I'm the president of. That story I have told to their CEO. It's a story I've told to other people when I've encouraged them to become customers of theirs. And stories are really valuable. And I think a lot of businesses don't ask their customers. I'm just a customer of theirs. I'm not a consultant. They don't pay me anything. I don't do training for them. But they know my story and they've shared that story. And creating a shared narrative draws on the positive aspects of every contributor so that we can see where we fit with each other. And that's one way to create a sense of engagement. Rituals. We create engagement by creating rituals within an organization. This is why, religions persist for thousands of years, because the rituals become meaningful. Right? Not all religions can be correct. Somebody has to be wrong. Yet they all persist.
Yeah.
Right? Well, why do they persist? It's because the rituals bring meaning to the people. So in any organization, what are the rituals? This is part of the corporate culture. This is part of the nonprofit culture. What's the ritual at a board meeting for the nonprofit? Do the board members feel valued? Is there a ritual that provides education? Is there a secret handshake? Why is there a secret handshake? Is that really important? There's a secret handshake because now I'm a part of something, and a sense of belonging helps us meet our deepest level of need. So any organization has to create team building rituals to create engagement.
It sounds pretty simple. Grow strengths, focus on strengths rather than trying to eliminate weaknesses, create stories around those strengths, and create rituals that further deepen those strengths. Some of the most profound strategies are so simple, and yet it really takes practice, doesn't
Well, I find it's the simple things that actually help simple people to live simply
it?
successfully. So often we try to make things complex,
Yes.
and they really aren't. In fact, part of my job as a consultant is to declutter all the stuff that's been brought in by perhaps other consultants. Well, I have the XYZ strategy. We use the patent-pended 5-star model of engagement or whatever else. I remember when I was 18 and I actually sold cars back in the early 1980s. And I remember the car dealership hired a fancy consultant to come in and help us sell more cars. And then, now we had to go to every closing with a piece of paper with a grid on it. And nobody wants to buy a car off a piece of paper with a grid. They want to smile and they want to hear this line. If I can get the numbers correct, would you like to park this in your car tonight and have that new car smell on the way to work tomorrow? That's the most effective way to sell a car. You get the buy-in and you get the sale. And to hell with the grid. Well, we actually don't need it. It's clutter.
It's about, in some ways, it's about how you make the people around you feel.
Well, I think it was Maya Angelou, and I could be wrong on who gets the credit for it, who said, in the end, people won't remember what we did. They'll remember how we made them feel.
Absolutely.
And I think that's true in our relationships with our family and friends and lovers and others. But I think that's equally true in business. People won't remember whether we made a mistake or not or what we did, but they will remember how we made them feel. And so we should always be pursuing what helps people feel not only valued, but helps them to feel their best and to feel the autonomy and the freedom to function at their highest level of performance.
Okay, so when we're talking about leadership, people, we naturally think of the person at the head of the organization, but we might want to expand that idea to, I'm a member of an organization. Can I still be a leader in that organization? Can I still be influential? And so I'll ask this question: how do leaders, whether they're at the top or they're within the organization, how do they intentionally shape the identity of their organization?
Sure. Well, I think it does go back to listening, but it also goes back to creating a common language, particularly among merging teams or new team members. Every profession, every organization has their own jargon, and making sure that people are aware of that helps to foster a sense of inclusion rather than a sense of exclusion. People are often afraid to say, "Well, I don't know what you mean by this term." And so they just try to guess it by context, and they often don't guess correctly. So making sure that everybody's speaking a common language is certainly one of those things that really helps a lot. One of the other things that helps is to recognize that, yes, there are leadership titles within an organization. That's how we ultimately know during a period of either crisis or stress or imminency, where a decision is going to be made. But General McChrystal wrote a great book. I can't remember the title of the book. It could be titled Teams of Teams. I think that could be the book title, but that's certainly the concept of the book, Teams of Teams. And, he recognized in the Iraq War that the top-down leadership of the military didn't really allow them the nimbleness that they needed on a battlefield with an enemy like ISIS, and that to have teams of teams allowed them to engage at a deeper level. Our sphere of people who we know, who we can sort of max out in our mind, is about 200 people, right? Mm-hmm. And so if I can create teams of teams, I can create a sphere of influence with 1,000 people who are able to act quickly and decisively based on a shared, both a shared narrative and a shared set of goals. So I think that's one of the other ways of doing it as well. Really picturing ourselves. And if you want to have a cadre of future leaders, we need teams of teams, so that the new the younger people, whether it's by age or by involvement in the organization, feel valued and that they have something to contribute, and that they are being, we might call it discipled in the context of a church. We might call it mentored in the context of leadership coaching. We might call it trained in the language of a corporate culture, and we might even call it parented in the context of training our children to be the future leaders of the family. Because one day my kids are going to have to figure out how to take care of me.
That's good. So,
right.
I
I want my kids to be leaders, because one day they're going to be in charge of me.
I'd go for that too. So you're talking about leadership that's a little different than our traditional model, which is one person is leader, or leadership is something I do. You're talking more about a leadership that's kind of a cultural.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We gain more power by sharing leadership.
Okay. So tell me about appreciative inquiry, and why is that one of the most powerful leadership abilities?
Well, it asks positive questions. It never asks what's wrong. It only asks what's right. So there's an expression that where the mind goes or where the thoughts go, energy flows. So if we're staying in the problem, we're not looking at the solution. And this is where corporate culture often ends up with negativity. How do we fix that problem? Let's fix that problem. What is the problem? Let's take a look at the installation department or whatever it is, and where are the problems there? Something's breaking down, and that the research actually shows, it's not just Richard hypothesizing this, that when we stay looking at the solution rather than the problem, there's a different energy and a different set of behaviors and a different set of outcomes. And so appreciative inquiry, it's been criticized for never looking at what's wrong. Well, it intentionally doesn't look at what's wrong because it appreciates what's right, and it tries to do more of. Look, there's a lot of things I do wrong in life. Okay, I've never been a perfect person, but there are a couple things I do really, really well. And so I've learned to stay in my area of strength and to delegate out those areas where it's somebody else's strength. And then we can share in the leadership.
What comes to mind as you're speaking is that many of us are contractors, or we work with clients and we produce a service or a product, and the client evaluates that, and there's a discussion, and sometimes there's not agreement, and often we're tempted to be defensive and get into that what's wrong, what went wrong, and it seems that transformational leadership can also be applied to the business client relationship.
Absolutely. Our clients are leaders. They're leaders who have ideas. They're leaders who have solutions. They're leaders who have investment. And when we look at our customers as part of the leadership team, then we create, again, shared intention, and we create a shared narrative, and we create shared language and shared rituals with them. Then they become lifelong customers. Because they're part of something. And it's a lot easier to make money from your existing customers than it is to find new customers. I don't know how much does it cost your business to find a new client, right? It's always easier to fish in a stocked pond. And so when we bring customers into a place of leadership, then we create essentially lifelong customers.
Okay, well, that's really, really informative. Now, you talk about a 5-factor model of personal leadership. Can you describe that?
Yeah, so the 5-factor model of personality, actually, it's a way of it's a way of measuring personality types. Personality is without a doubt sort of the underlying, you know, big thing in the room. When I'm doing work with nonprofits, I talk about the different faces of philanthropy. What I'm really talking about are the different personalities and how you can open up the wallets and create givers out of those who have the capacity to be givers. And every nonprofit organization has that. So in business, the 5-factor personality traits has been utilized as a way of really measuring core personality traits that leaders have. It includes the trait of openness. This is imagination and insight. The trait of conscientiousness. This is thoughtfulness, impulse control, extroversion. And extroversion is important. Many people aren't naturally extroverts, but this is the ability to be assertive and to be social, which is, of course, important in creating engagement. And agreeableness is about kindness. C.S. Lewis talked about the different types of love, and we all know what erotic love is, eros, right? We all know what agape love is. We all know what philia love is, but there was a 4th type of love. And that was, he used a Greek word called storge love, the natural affinity that one person has towards another just because they're a fellow human being. And agreeableness really, I think, is sort of the psychological measure of the capacity to recognize that other people are okay. That even if they're different than us, their hair is weird, their wealth is different, their language is different. It's what has the capacity to really bring us all together, which is important because we all are working in a multicultural world. And unfortunately, in the U.S., we look at multicultural as, this color person is different than this color person, or this sexual orientation is different than this sexual orientation. Those are the big issues sort of facing our country always when it comes to diversity. But the reality is everybody is different than everybody. And our experiences are different than others. And I have people who look like me, who don't have anything in common with me, and other people who don't look like me, who when I talk to them have a lot in common with me. And agreeableness is sort of that measure of, if you will, storge love, the capacity to simply respect and care for other people because they are other fellow people. And then that 5th one is neuroticism. As a therapist, this is my favorite. What traits of moodiness and emotional instability do people have? And no matter how normal a person is, they're always neurotic as well. So, Dave, I know you pretty well. We've had dinner together. We've met for lunch together. We've gone to meetings together. We've been on the phone together. David, you're a weird guy. And I guarantee when the webinar is over and you talk to one of your friends or coworkers or somebody later today, you're going to be like, Richard really knows his stuff, but man, he's a weird guy. Why? Because we all have some neuroticism, and that's what makes us creative. So when I see people who are so different than me and weird, I have to recognize that that's actually their strength, not their deficit. And people who have the capacity to value that in others have the capacity to lead, I think, a greater number of people.
I think sometimes, one example of leadership or one context of leadership is when you're giving a public presentation. And often the reason that they say public speaking is the greatest fear of people, is even greater than the fear of death, is that immediately when you're in front of that audience, you think separation. You think it's me, and on the other side, it's them. There's
Right.
a lot of judgment. There's a lot of separation. What you're talking about is empathy. And I remember in my public speaking experiences, how if I took a moment and rather than thinking, how am I coming across? What are they thinking of me? And them, me, them, me. If I took a moment and began to consider, what are people feeling that are in this room? What did they experience before they came into this room? What, how can I identify with the others in the room? And speaking as a kind of leadership, and to bring that kind of empathy is,
I think
I think,
speakers communicate that powerfully by where they position themselves as well. So let me give you a couple different examples.
okay.
I went to go see Wayne Newton the other night here in Las Vegas, right?
Okay.
And I wish I saw the show 30 years ago when I had the idea, but I waited. I'll go next week. And enough years go by.
Better late than never.
Right, exactly. So I finally went to the show. Well, he does a show called Wayne Newton Up Close and Personal. Theater with about 150 seats in it. And he tells stories about Las Vegas and all kinds of interesting stuff, plays some songs and those sort of things. But he didn't stay up on stage. He did the same thing that he was doing in 1964. He walked out into the audience. Why was he the longest reigning act in Las Vegas? Because he walked out into the audience. He played his guitar, in the back of the theater and in the front of the theater. Well, you see this in churches. You see a minister standing behind the pulpit versus a minister who goes and gives his sermon from the from the aisle, walking and sharing that message with people. You see this with public speakers. Let's take Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins has I'd hate to be a camera guy for Tony Robbins, because you gotta follow him around the theater because he's talking to people, he's interacting with people, and he's walking up all the way to the balcony, and so how
down.
What? So how do we communicate that in a public speaking situation? I'm doing a TED Talk next month, April 6th or April 5th, actually, in Oklahoma City. And I'm a little bummed because I'm going to be restricted to the stage. I'm not going to be able to walk into the audience. The message that I have to share with them at the TED Talk is a message I want to involve them in. And so I'm going to be stuck on the stage because that's the way it works. And I'm not real happy about that. So I think, the message here is that powerful speakers, whether it's a pastor, whether that's a Tony Robbins motivational speaker, whether that's a political candidate, a political candidate who walks off the stage and walks out into the crowd.
Are these people talking? I don't want to do it. I want to leave.
Okay. Keep going. I think we lost one.
Yeah, right. So one of the things that, again, is just important is how does our nonverbal communication, communicate inclusion and involvement?
Okay.
And that's what effective public speakers do, or public performers like Wayne Newton. So I'm not here for your applause and accolades. I'm here to be with you. I mean, Wayne Newton was out in the audience for half the show, signing autographs and singing duets with people and letting them do selfies with them. He was having a great time. Everybody was happy, even if his voice isn't the same as it was 30 years ago.
And that doesn't matter as much, does it?
Doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
He only had the ability to sing probably 5 songs. Right? He didn't have the ability to sing 90 minutes straight. But no, everybody had a thoroughly enjoyable evening.
So you can get away with a lot more if you're a transformational leader.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems like one of the threads throughout this discussion is that transformational leadership involves breaking down the barrier between the leader, breaking down all those traditional barriers between the leader and the people, that we all call forth the leadership of everyone in the room.
Well, and the great part about transformational leadership is it lets you draw on the energy of others, because there's times in leadership when you're too tired to do it. And transformational leadership means others can be your source of energy, or even help you cross the finish line.
So we sometimes think of leaders as you're born a leader. You are a gifted person. Some people are leaders, and some people just aren't leaders. And we talk about the word charisma, and that certain people have charisma, certain people don't have charisma. Like if you have it, wonderful. You can be a leader. If you don't have it, well, you missed out, and you need to do something else. Is charisma something that a person can actually develop?
So yes, I think everybody has the capacity to be a leader. And I think even the person who isn't a charismatic person can be a very important leader, and accomplish tremendous things. One of the areas of leadership that's interesting me is the area of leadership among blue collar workers. And we often think of leadership as the white collar CEO suite, but in many companies, for example, there may be, a handful of white collar, bean counters and COOs and CEOs and executive sales managers and some salespeople, but largely the wealth of that company is coming from the production of those blue collar workers who are actually out there creating, manufacturing, distributing, driving, digging, and all of those sorts of things. And there's been a real push for leadership among leadership development among those sectors, because what companies recognize is that when drivers are leaders, they improve logistics. And when logistics are improved, manufacturing capacity can be increased. And that leadership at every level is as important as leadership at any level. And among frontline employees, maybe even employees with a high turnover, like a fast food place or like a hospitality industry, like a hotel, and front desk clerks have a notorious turnover rate. How can leadership be taught and skills developed at those entry level levels? And what we find is that it increases the length of tenure. And of course, employee retention is important, because the lower the turnover, the lower the cost. Employee satisfaction is higher, which we know leads to better customer service. Better customer service, we know, leads to greater profits. And so by recognizing that leadership can and should occur at every level, we really create success. A lot of companies hire me to come in and work with their executives, their CEOs, COOs, CFOs, et cetera. And not nearly as many companies hire me to come in and talk about leadership to their frontline employees. But when the companies that do hire me have me come speak to their frontline employees rather than their C-suite, those are the companies that tend to have the greatest level of growth over the next 12 months.
So it sounds like there is a cost benefit to transformational leadership.
Oh, absolutely. And the research shows that. The cool thing about leadership is it's actually well researched. Somebody, I know it doesn't look like it from what you're seeing here, but somebody actually cleaned my office here at home. My office is over at Tropicana and Rainbow, and that's where most of my books are. But I had a book on my desk, and somebody has cleaned my office, which nobody should do, because I know exactly where everything is.
You can't find anything.
I got a book over somewhere in this office. It's this book, and it's titled The Bass Handbook of Leadership. And it's all the peer-reviewed research on specifically transformational leadership. But leadership isn't something that's sort of out there in la-la land. It's not just the weekend seminar. It's actually a peer-reviewed, empirical set of strategies for creating successful organizations. And there's mountains of research showing how leadership translates directly into everything from dollars to employee satisfaction to benefits for the community. One of the things that I think too many leadership programs stress are the employees or are the customers. Rather than the specific relationship to the community. Amazon's got with their search for, world headquarters number 2 or whatever it was, and then bailing out of New York after making the decision to go into New York. Why did that fall apart on them? Because they didn't recognize their need to communicate and participate fully at every level with the community, which was obviously very concerned about everything from gentrification to rent destabilization to traffic to, whatever else was going on. And and Amazon's not the only company who failed to communicate and consider the community as important stakeholders as well. So, I think history is filled with companies that aren't necessarily welcome in their own hometown.
Yes. So there was a cost for both the community and for Amazon.
Right.
Because that did not happen.
Exactly.
So, okay. Before we open it up for questions, I'd just like to ask one final question. Let's put this in the context of networking.
Right.
Here in Las Vegas, and throughout the country, we find ourselves in networking situations. We're in a room, we're meeting new people, we're milling around and making new connections. How can one network as a transformational leader and transform that networking experience?
The networking experience, I think, the transformational leaders can engage in is finding out about other people.
Okay.
The most valuable way to network is not to say, hi, I'm Richard. I'm with Expert Leadership Performance, and I do X, Y, Z. Do you know anybody who needs X, Y, Z done? But instead to say, hi, David, this is the second time I've seen you at one of these events. I didn't get a chance to talk to you last time. I'm really curious about the work that you do and why you found these meetings valuable, or even exposing my own vulnerabilities. I could say, hey, Edward, this is the first time we've had a chance to meet before, and so I'm curious if you've been attending these webinars in the past, or even facilitating these webinars in the past, and how it's benefited you. When I lead with a question, I'm doing everything from developing rapport to communicating empathy to creating a new shared narrative and experience. All of those things we've talked about today. And I do a lot of networking, and it's pretty fun because I spend less time talking about me and more time talking about others. And it gives me the ability to create partnerships, gives me the ability to create depth in those relationships, and to do more than just sell, but to cooperate.
That's almost the greatest gift you can give another person, to listen, to draw them out, and you get back to your term appreciative inquiry, applying that in a networking situation. Wow, that's really valuable. So let's go ahead and open this up for questions. And I know we've got Ed, and we've got Elta, and there's another person that I'm just seeing a phone number. I don't know if they can actually speak. So guess what, Ed? It's all up to you.
Oh, goodness. Got to be the leader.
That's right. Somebody's got to be in charge.
Yeah. No, I have a question. First of all, thank you very much. Much of this resonated. And just by way of quick introduction, I got to know David when he was living here in Connecticut, where I am, at a networking session. We've done some work together that's really worked out really well. Leadership is a very sort of attractive and sexy word, and also can be scary. I agree with you that almost anybody can be. Once it's thrust upon you, once you stick your neck out and you start actually getting some things done and transforming, it could also be a bit of a scary existence. So I guess my question really comes down to, how do you sustain that and don't wear yourself out? Because let's face it, in a lot of companies, as you're successful, you will also become a target. So it will take some courage and strength and some abilities to recognize how you sustain a leadership position.
I think back to McChrystal and teams of teams, because then we can share the leadership, then we can share the energy. The example that I'm facing right now is the new board chairman of a board that really hasn't functioned as a board. Is I'm doing a lot. That's not sustainable. If I do over the next 12 months what I've done over the last 6 weeks, I'm not going to have time for my job. I'm not going to have time for my family. I'm not going to have time for, the tasks that need to be done. So back to Randy Dobbs, creating a cadre of future leaders, I'm working with the other board members as well as the stakeholders, from employees to constituents within the organization, to share that leadership, which gives the ability to step back, take a vacation, to allow somebody else to answer the question. One of the biggest mistakes. So as a therapist, I used to be involved in the 90s with a lot of crisis response training. Part of that is identifying the people who will communicate to the public, the press, state agencies, and others in the time of crisis. If you have an ongoing crisis for a 24, 48, 72-hour period, anything from finding the missing person to rescuing the trapped coal miners to a school shooting or whatever other crisis situation must be going on, that person who is in front of the camera has to be a group of people, because it's not sustainable for one person to always be that person. So an organization might have a communications director. That may be an official position within a company. That's fine. It helps us get our advertising done, our memos out, our share our vision statement, etc. But then we prepared other leaders to also step up to the plate to share that responsibility, and that allows any leader to have the energy to go forward. It's really sort of a rocket booster system, in that there's 3 levels of power, and different people are able to fill that in, because we don't see ourselves as the most important person, but as the person who's helping to identify all the important people.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Richard, you have a couple books that I'm wondering if they're hidden in your office now, or maybe you could tell us about those books. I might be able to pull up.
Oh, wait, here, I just found there's a box next to my desk. Wow, this is great. Something else. I found the missing remote control.
Oh, that's funny.
This was awesome. So yeah, I've written a couple of books, and they actually happen to be right here. So one I wrote in 2013 titled Transformational Leadership: How to Lead from Your Strengths and Maximize Your Impact. And I wrote that actually as a textbook for a university where I teach, as an intro leadership book. And it's a great book. It's the first third talks about, sort of defining transformational leadership from an academic perspective, but the last 2/3 are about how I can transform myself so that I can be an effective leader. The most recent book I wrote is titled Viral Leadership: Seize the Power of Now to Create Lasting Transformation in Business. And here's the cool thing. Chris Nassetta, who's the CEO of Hilton Worldwide, he liked the book, so he wrote a blurb. And Randy Dobbs, the former CEO of General Electric Capital, wrote a foreword to the book. And probably without a doubt, one of the most influential leader books for me is Transformation Leadership by Randy Dobbs. He wrote this in 2010. He was the CEO of General Electric Capital, the CEO of Philips Medical North America, as in Philips light bulbs, Philips TVs, Philips medical supplies, and also the CEO of, some of you might remember in the 90s, a federal security company, USIC. So, he's got billion-dollar operational experience, and he and I have partnered on a number of projects. In fact, he's going to be out here in Las Vegas next week, spending a couple days with me as we work on our new book, which is tentatively titled Leading Across the Generations. So lots of good resources out there, though. Again, General McChrystal's book, Teams of Teams, is really a great leadership book for any business. And looking at, the great thing about Harvard Business Review is that many of the articles there are actually filled with academic citations. Mm-hmm. So if you have a Harvard Business Review subscription, get online and look for transformational leadership and find some of those resources, because they are they're well-supported outcomes with the academic research that shows us what's actually the most effective way to lead other people. And so just a ton of different resources out there. And my book, again, they're available on Amazon or anywhere else books are sold, and they're pretty good. I'd buy it if I didn't have a garage full of them.
That's marvelous.
Right.
Let me show you a screen. Here's from our marketing department site. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, and these 2 books of Richard's are on Amazon, and you could go to his page on marketingdepartmentlv.com and look at his bio, and that's what you're looking at right now. So definitely, Richard, this has been a valuable experience, and I thank everyone for being on this webinar.
It's been great having everybody.
Yeah, we'll definitely do more of this, and I'm also glad to get Richard and Ed together.
Yeah.
You both are members of the marketing department team. We don't see Ed too much. He's not in
Las Vegas.
I mean, he's not in Las Vegas, over in Connecticut, but still on the team.
For coffee in that place that you go, it's a little tough for me to get out there and come back again.
Yeah, I guess it is. But the weather's a lot better.
Yeah, it sure is.
Well, we'll get you out here, Ed. So anyway, it's really impressed me today how transformational leadership, it seems like it's kind of a nebulous concept, but when you look at it, it's kind of like the gasoline that runs a car, that you can have a car in beautiful condition, but without gasoline, it's not going to go anywhere. And transformational leadership is that fuel, really, that makes things work. And so I don't know if you've ever used that illustration, Richard, but it's really an element that makes all the difference in the world, in the culture of an organization, in a relationship with a client, in the experience at a networking event. Transformational leadership. See yourself as a transformational leadership and transform the whole experience.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much. And we'll have another webinar next month.
Fabulous.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye now.